make, and Diana, I'm sorry, helped make our town one table a very successful event. I heard from many different people that not only is it their favorite event of Carbondale, but this year in particular, just to be, I don't know whether the bear blessed us or not, but it was a great event. And it's typical of a lot of events in Carbondale where it wouldn't happen without you. It just wouldn't happen. So we're really appreciative of all the effort that goes into that. And so we have a certificate of recognition as well as a gift for our recreation center right next door. So I would like to recognize a few people and just really appreciate and thank everyone who's made it possible. Do it over here so we're not tripping over the cords. Is Mario Talecia here? Mario. All right. How about Mariana Talecia? Am I pronouncing your last name? Talecia. Thank you. Okay. Jenny Aquino Valenzo. Jenny, how are you doing? Yeah, good. Okay. Emily Espinoza Guzman. I like your green hair. Is that new? All right.
Yeah.
Emiliano Galindo.
You want to get started?
Benavides.
It's going to take a while.
Thank you very much. It's your brother? All right. You might have to keep the gift certificate to see what Elian Garcia Valente. All right. Thank you. Chelsea Cruz Guzman. Chelsea, did you have? You did? Canada Galindo Benavides. Can somebody help me with that last name?
Galindo Benavides.
There we go. Benavides. There we go. Andrew Miranda. There we go. Abigail Loya Tano. All right. Thank you all. Diana, Sandy, thank you very much for making it happen.
Thank you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. I'm Dan Richardson. I'm the mayor of Carbondale, and I'm very appreciative of all your help. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. 6:05. We will bring the meeting to order. And Kathy, will you do roll call?
Heather Henry.
Here.
Marty Silverstein.
Here.
Luis Illanes.
Here.
Erica Sparhawk. Here. Ben.
Here.
Frosty Marriott.
Here.
Dan Richardson.
Here.
Can I do a what for? This is the first time we've had a full board in a while.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right. Item number 2 is the consent agenda. We have the accounts payable, trustee minutes for the 18th and the 22nd. We have a liquor license renewal for 7-Eleven, a recommendation for a reappointment to the environmental board, ordinance number 14, series of 2017, Lot A, Crystal Village Major Site Plan Review and Major Plat Amendment. And lastly, the Household Hazardous Waste Day proposal for e-waste. Anybody have any questions? Anything cold? Anybody want to make a motion?
Make a motion to accept the consent agenda.
Motion by Marty, seconded by Erica. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say no. Motion passes. Thank you. 3 is persons present not on the agenda. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to address the board who's not on the agenda, on an issue that's not on the agenda? Okay. Trustee comments.
Why do you always look at me when you say that?
Just
Okay, I'll kick it off.
What events are coming up?
The first thing is we had the second Sunday of the summer concert. This past, once again, it was a big success. We ended it a little bit early because of concerns about lightning, but the band was good. The Drunken Hearts.
band was great.
Yeah, the band was great. They were great. And they loved it here. They'd love to come again. So that was really good. I especially want to thank our media partners, Soper, Son, and KD&K, helping with the publicity, and KD&K with the broadcasting, so we were able to reach a larger audience than in past years. So that was one thing that was very good. Other thing I want to say, John, I believe we have a card for you, as this is your last meeting, and we have a chance to abuse you one last time. He'll be there in a minute, but we want service.
Got everybody.
I don't think that's for us. And we want to thank you for attending meetings. We know the Soper Sun isn't paying you a whole heck of a lot to be here, but you're still here.
It's immense.
Sure. Okay, I want my donation to the Sun back. Okay, but thank you for coming. I think you've been very fair in your coverage of us. Even though I may not always agree with you. I know that, but I think you've been fair. So, John, thank you.
John, I'd echo that, not only with the Soper Sun, but your years in other papers as well. I really appreciate your dedication to our community, informing them, and keeping us on our toes. And I wish you luck in your endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. It's been fun. I've been covering this for almost 40 years.
Is this the best board ever? Is this the best board ever? Is this the best board ever?
He's a little hard of hearing. You might have to speak up. Okay.
Don't be a stranger.
Oh, I won't. You'll see me. I'll be around. I've done that.
One or two other things. The care benefit is this Saturday, and as those of us who had heard with the pigs on Interstate 70, I'd fashion a guess that care was probably there helping out with keeping the pigs happy. So that the orchard Saturday, money goes for a good cause. A personal comment, I'd like to express our heartfelt concern and prayers for the people in Houston and in Florida as they try to recover from earthquakes, hurricanes, etc. It's going to be quite a while before it's back to normal for them. That's all I got.
Thanks, Marty. Who else? It's been 3 weeks. Ben.
I attended the Trails Commission meeting last night. They hadn't had one for quite a few months. They tend to all be off biking and doing all that stuff all summer, so they don't really meet in the summer. But they had a really good work session where they split up into small groups and broke up the priority issues around drainage and gaps in trails around the safe routes concept, and they're going to bring back a recommendation to us on sort of what are their top priorities in those areas for this year, and then we can work that into our budget. So really good meeting there. The only other comment I would have is just I see so many special event liquor licenses on our agendas. We spend a good amount of time on them. But then I noticed that the renewal liquor licenses for establishments just go through our consent agenda. And I wonder if at some point we might want to consider changing that process. I haven't seen us deny or change the liquor license. I get that it's a promotional opportunity for organizations. I doubt it's their key promotional opportunity that really boosts their ticket sales. But if they feel like that's important, I just wonder if that's something that could take out 20 minutes or so and if it's sort of a rubber stamp anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably could make it administrative if you wanted to, if there's no objections. The renewals actually used to be on the regular agenda, and the board moved them to consent to streamline them if there was no issues on the PD side.
Kind of what once staff recommends it and Gene has checked it and all that, once it comes through like that and they've got all their ducks in a row, I just haven't seen us take action on any of those. It seems very much a rubber stamp, and so I don't know if it's the best use of our time, but that's just something that looked at our agenda for the evening.
Let's have an offline discussion about that.
Okay.
I can't think, it's not a no-brainer for me, but
Okay.
yeah.
That is all.
That's all? Who else? Luis?
I just wanted to an event that we have at the Art Museum on Sunday. It's Art en Español, which is an event we have not once a month, but quarterly, and it's with Samuel Bernal from La Tricolor, and it's a free and open event to the family where we're doing studio portraits for family, food, and free music. So it happens at 2 o'clock on Sunday, so great event for the whole community throughout the valley.
That's awesome.
All right. I'll jump in. First, just to RAFTA. We've all heard about the Grand Avenue Bridge project and how that's working. I think there's a pretty strong consensus that RAFTA is doing a really good job, and the Glenwood Springs Police Chief, Terry Wilson, who's not an easy one, is quoted as saying, RAFTA is killing it. You know, meaning RAFTA is really doing a good job addressing traffic, and they've really had an on-demand transit service for the past few weeks. And I think it's in part because of the support that the community grow to a size where it can offer that. But I think that's a big deal that our transit, our little rural transit authority can adapt to that. So kudos to RAFTA. I wanted to quickly read a portion of an email from Kelly Flanagan, who's our local representative for energy, and I think this is kind of a big deal as well. Xcel Energy is our electric provider and our electric utility, and they're proposing a new plan to the PUC. And it struck me where they are, given 10, 15 years ago, where they resistance to renewable energy. But to quote Kelly, she says, this plan would allow us to meet both the spirit and the letter of Governor Hickenlooper's recent executive order supporting Colorado's energy transition by surpassing all emissions targets, including the targeted 35% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions from 2020 levels by 2030. And if the Colorado Energy Plan is implemented, Xcel could achieve 55% renewable energy on our power grid by 2026 and reduce carbon emissions by 60% from 2005 levels, all while lowering costs to customers. And she says, in the past 4 years, the average electric bill for Xcel Energy's Colorado residential customers has decreased by 6%. And this proposal can help keep Colorado electricity costs for customers low and predictable. So our bills have decreased, and so this is a huge accolades for Clear and GCE and Core and Xcel for what's been working. But to me, this is a clear sign that the transition to a clean energy economy and emissions reductions is not only successful, but it's turning out to be an economic boon. So I think this is great news. It's a milestone for us. So thanks to everybody, including I see Mark here. Mark is one of the ones, even though the wastewater treatment plant's in Holy Cross territory, Mark's done a lot too to reduce energy, and it's exciting for me to read. So kudos. A few other things. Thanks to Wilderness Workshop and the Western Slope Conservation Center, I attended an event up on the top of McClure Pass on Saturday. It was really intended to show the unity between the Crystal River Valleys and the Roy Fork Valley and the North Fork Valley and our watershed and continuing the efforts that we've done in the Thompson Divide and showing that at least one of my messages was that Carbondale is just as interested in helping the North Fork Valleys protect their watersheds and showing support. So it was appreciated being involved. I attended the Mayor's Summit down in Denver last week, and the turnout wasn't great, but there were a few takeaways that I thought I'd share. Just a shout out to Representative Rankin. Representative Millie Hamner was there and really complimented the entire Joint Budget Committee on working in a nonpartisan fashion to make the budget work in Colorado. So that's really a shift from what we're seeing in Washington. So kudos. I thought it was an interesting statistic that I read that Colorado spends 12% on criminals and only 8% on higher education. That's a trend going in the wrong direction, in my opinion. A couple other things. The other thing was just realizing that well, let me back up. The gas tax revenue is slightly increasing, but the purchasing power is decreasing at the same rate. I don't remember the exact statistic, but our ability as a state to pay is essentially half of what it was when I was a kid. And so that affects us here locally as well. So everything rolls downhill. So what the state can't do, we have to pick up locally. So I just thought that's an interesting statistic to put out there. I see Gene over there. There was a police chief who spoke and said that there's an enormous unfunded mandate for training for police and how new regulations are requiring it police, but there isn't necessarily the money to support that. So I think that's important for us to keep in mind as Gene comes before us to ask for training funds, that a lot of it is required, but not necessarily funded by the state. So that was good to know. And it seemed like in general, there's a trend to switch from deadly force to de-escalation of events, which I think is something that Gene has talked about, which I thought was good. And lastly, Governor Donna Lynn spoke. She's also running for governor, and storyboard, I think they call it, where you can learn more about that. And lastly, I wanted to say thanks to Jesse at the Library District, RE1, and Town of Carbondale staff for really landscaping at the library. That was becoming an eyesore, and it was one of those things that really took all those agencies to come together to make it look presentable, so I appreciate that. Now with that, I'll be quiet and see if anybody else has any final comments to share. Seeing none, I will move on. Mark is not going to join us tonight, so Jay, you don't have anything to share on his behalf, do you?
Well, lots to share, but
okay. We'll move on to item number 6, special event liquor license for the True Media Foundation. Anybody here from the True Media Foundation?
he couldn't make it,
Okay.
but I don't see any reason, if there's no issues with it, to move forward.
Okay. So, Kathy, is Jay right? No issues that you want to mention?
There's no issues, yeah.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for staff on this one? Nobody wants to prove Ben wrong or anything like that? Okay. Anybody want to make a motion?
Move to approve liquor license, special event liquor license for True Media Foundation.
Anybody want to second that?
Second.
Motion by Ben, seconded by Erica. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. All right. Motion passes. Item number 7, special event liquor license for the Dance Initiative. Anybody here for that? All right. Welcome.
My name is Peter Gilbert, and I'm the Executive Director of Dance Initiative. And it's been about 3 years since I've appeared before this committee. And Frosty was the only member of the trustees at the time that you all elected to grant Dance Initiative and our partners, Carbondale Arts, the old library, which has now been refurbished and conditioned into the launch pad. But I'm here to represent both Dance Initiative and the Launchpads Party, which is a joint venture of Dance Initiative and Carbondale Arts, so one at a time. Dance Initiative's event is at the end of its residency for a dance company from Pittsburgh and to work for a week in the Launchpad. They'll be creating a new work, and on Saturday they'll be performing it. But on Friday night we're screening an award-winning documentary film called Mr. Gaga by an Israeli choreographer. We're having sort of an open house, so just a little sort of party, and there'll be various artists that will be performing just on a pop-up basis. So it'll be a fairly quiet, calm evening, but we will be serving wine and beer probably.
Okay. Thank you. And you're familiar with all the conditions of the liquor license? And
Yes.
All right.
I've been well informed.
Great.
By Amy as well as Ken.
Good. Because we know where to find you.
I'll be around.
Okay. Any questions of the applicant or? Okay. Anyone want to make a motion?
I make a motion to approve the special liquor license for Dance Initiative.
Second.
Motion by Marty, seconded by Luis. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. All right. Moving on to the next one. Liquor, item number 8, special event liquor license for Carbondale Arts. Take it away, Peter.
I'm back representing Carbondale Arts. Dance Initiative and Carbondale Arts are partners, and we're going to host a fundraising party for the Launchpad. And it will involve a game called Art Heist, and the directions are about a page long, so I haven't really been through them, but it should be a lot of fun. And we will be having, the cost of the event is being reduced so more people can come. It'll be not a sit-down meal like last year, but it'll be a cocktail party and finger food, and it should be lots of fun. So that's the nature of the event. Proceeds go to keeping the Launchpad up and running, and purchased a number of items with the proceeds, including just taking care of the gardens and whatever outside.
Good. Well, we appreciate you taking care of that building. Anyone like to make a motion?
Approve the liquor license for the Launchpad for October 7th. Sorry, I'm on the right one. Yep. Second.
Motion by Erica, seconded by Heather. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Say no. All right. Good luck, Peter.
Well, on the 29th, the 30th is the performance, and then the 6th is the party for the Launchpad. So
Okay.
come on over. Frosty, I know you'll be there. Good night, all.
See you Saturday.
All right. Item number 9, bear activity in Carbondale. Jay, you want to introduce us?
There's a memo in your packet from Gene. John Grove should be here any moment from the DOW to participate in this discussion unless something's come up in the meantime.
We can talk about the grant first if we...
Why don't we do that real quick? And
Okay.
That's a good idea. We've got Mark here, and we'll let him move on. So,
Okay.
Mark, we talked about Nettle Creek Hydro.
We'll postpone the discussion on bear activity and move to item number 10, Nettle Creek Hydro Plant Grant.
Call me Grant, huh?
This is a big deal. This is a long time coming.
So, this is, once again, I'm pigeonholing, trying to get some of this stuff done. The hydro plant, I think, for those that have been around, has kind of been quite some time, and we have approached it for many years, and all of a sudden, Kurt out of Telluride, I can't remember, he's with...
Kurt Johnson, Telluride Energy. Yep.
He hold of this and said, let's go for it and run with it. I've got a way to do it. And he got her done.
Yeah.
So I think that the time is appropriate to pigeonhole it in and see what we can do with it. We just finished we're in the process of work at Nettle Creek along with the Forest Service permit. So all these ancillary items that were kind of holding everything up, making it kind of scary to project into, It all, the Forest Service seems to be on board with it. We've done some preliminary neighborhood meetings and things like that, and it's time to do a feasibility study and just get off of the threshold and see whether we're stepping forward or backwards with it.
All right. So one of the unique aspects of this grant, and it's one of the reasons why we wanted to bring it forward to you and have the board directly approve it before we put it in, is that it's got a provision that if we don't follow through and actually finance the project for the actual construction, if it is shown through the Water and Power Authority program, that we may have to pay back our part of the feasibility, the granted portion of the feasibility study, which would be $15,000. Mark and I and Kevin had some discussions with the granting agency, and I don't think that's actually ever been done. It's a provision that they have in there which deals with the state authorization for their funding. So we're comfortable moving forward with this model. It could create another funding mechanism for actually making the improvements. It's a logical first step, but it's a little quirky aspect of the granting agency that we normally don't see for a feasibility study. So that's why we want to make you aware of that provision.
But it's a good funding source, and it's not like there's any reason why we wouldn't certainly explore that option.
You know, and I think it's a win-win to try and go through with the grant, and you know, $15,000 is an investment, but when you look at hydros, the payback is going to be what it is, and once they get going, they just go and go and go and go. So eventually, it'll pay out that 15 grand over the life of it. Not to say that it's no money, but you know, I think that full spectrum of all that, the 15,000 is a worthy chunk to look at and say, well, you know, we could probably go either way. It seems logical to me.
I might give a little historical background, and the city of Aspen has some hydros championed by you. Is that a fair statement, Mark?
Mark Lunas did most of it.
Okay, but
been involved in it.
You know, 20, 30 years later, it's turned out to be a heck of an investment, particularly for a utility to implement hydro. So Mark's first rodeo with hydro. What we would be doing with this project is just capturing what is now wasted energy from the raw water distribution system. We're not diverting any more water from a stream. We're just capitalizing on energy that is currently wasted. It's exciting to me, and to me, hydro in this situation, you know, even if it has a 30-year payback, makes all the sense in the world and is a hedge against expensive electric rates down the road. So this project has been on the drawing board for at least a decade. So I appreciate you keeping it on there, Mark, and making it happen. So I'll get off my soapbox.
This is really exciting.
Yeah.
Add water.
Just add water. Any questions of Mark? Ben?
Could you just outline the process forward? So we apply for the grant, assuming we receive the grant, we do the feasibility study, and then what's sort of the time frame? And then are we going to be asked to budget quite a bit, or is it going to come out of utility funds? Like, what are we just kind of looking at?
You know, this is a micro hydro, and it's gonna. If I could put a vision of a septic tank, 1,000-gallon septic tank would probably house, I'm going to say 80% of everything that we need to do. So it's a small fit. In my mind, it'll easily fit in this space right here. And I think that for the most part, it's going to be not call it a shelf item, but it'll be a pretty quick item to put in. You need to intercept the raw water line at Nettle Creek, and I think that we would have to be able to do that, to cut the line, insert this thing, and get the line back up and running, I would say within 8 hours. That would be my goal. Lose the clear well at Nettle Creek, and we can make provisions back and forth on it, but you know, we've got Burke taken care of. The only thing we don't really have under our belt right now would be a franchise agreement with Holy Cross. That might take some time.
Yeah, just to clarify, we would enter in negotiations with Holy Cross to do a power purchase agreement, which would be a little different model than what we've done on solar. But there's some good examples to follow, and we've been involved in negotiating them in other jurisdictions, so that shouldn't. But I think in terms of your time frame, the grant's essentially been awarded if we sign the contract docs.
Okay.
So what would happen would be the securing the consultant to move forward, doing the actual feasibility study, and then looking at how those dollars align, which we to you before actually then saying, hey, let's build or not build this. We would expect that feasibility study to be done sometime in the next 6 to 8 months, I think would be a safe window to come back and say, here's where we stand on the pros and cons of doing this project. We have traditionally budgeted through the utility fund, the matching funds to do the hydro project. It's all been guesstimates. And we'd have to take a look at the power purchase agreement, whether we use our own money or use additional grant money or the funding through the Water and Power Authority. The last micro hydro involved in, we did a split of DOLA funding and Water Power Authority loans to package together. It was a much bigger project than this. And I think what you look at is if you can get the payback in 20 years or less on hydro, you're looking at an 80 to 100-year project in terms of the lifespan of the infrastructure. So we'll see, but hopefully within 6 or 8 months we'll come back with you with a nice fancy report to say this is a go or not.
But that report will also include like 30% design, something like that will be, you think?
I think that the feasibility would be whether it's, you know, to look at the payback and suitability of it. And I would bet that maybe by spring of that 2018.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure the level of design docs we'd have. It depends on how it comes together. I know, Kevin, if you've looked at that aspect of it yet.
You might have some very preliminary engineering on it, but it'll still take a little bit of work, but I still would anticipate it being a fairly short time frame.
Okay.
Yeah, the real issue is just getting the equipment manufactured. But to clarify, the reason why this has been out there so long was the special use permit from the Forest Service, because we are on an annual renewal. And Mark, after tons of diligence over the last decade, 11 years, we've got that. We're in a better position to move forward on it.
Nice.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Luis?
One question. Are there any concerns with neighbors in that area?
Yes and no. I think the concern with neighbors is noise. And this is, I don't know how big a horsepower motor this would be, but this is a small turbine. And I think that, you know, mitigation on noise would be easily taken care of. The neighbors a mile away up the road, but it is up a canyon, so it might carry.
So as part of the design, the feasibility study, we would engage the direct neighbors. Mark's already been having discussions with them. We work pretty closely with the representatives on road maintenance and access to the. So, you know, the intent would be to bring them in as part of the discussion, so it's not kind of a last-minute thing. There's been both some real successes in microhydro and some failures where the noise hasn't been dealt with. So, you know, I think we'll be pretty careful on that issue up front.
Thanks.
There's a recommendation on page 98 from staff. Anybody wants to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the grant contract and for the mayor to sign the Water Resources and Power Development Authority grant agreement.
Second.
Motion by Marty, seconded by Luis. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say no. All right. Congratulations, Mark. Here we go to the next step.
Okay. Persevering with us for a long time to get us to this point.
Good things take time.
Okay. Thank you for your endurance.
It's all worth it. So hopefully this will come to fruition for everyone.
in our lifetime.
Thanks for coming, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
So we can move on to item number 9, and maybe, so we're still a little about 15 minutes ahead of schedule, but we can talk about kind of the logistics of what we want to. So let's go back to continued discussion of bear activity in Carbondale. So we have a bear ordinance. Last meeting or the meeting before that, we talked about the increased bear activity. So to me, the questions tonight, revisit that ordinance, and if so, how? And I know we have some haulers here, so do we want to discuss what we require in terms of bear-resistant containers? Jay, is there anything else you want to?
Well, just, the memo which you have includes some of the issues we've been dealing with so far this year. The amount have gone out. We're now been in the ticketing stage. There's been a few tickets issued. Some of the challenges we have with our current ordinance is that we require folks to go purchase or acquire a bear-proof, and I don't think bear-proof is the right term, a bear-resistant trash can. Well, each of the haulers use or can use different systems for their trash disposal systems and how they load their trucks. Some work with certain cans and some don't. So we've had feedback from residents saying, hey, I've gone out, followed your bear-resistant trash can, but it doesn't work for my hauler, and it doesn't work with their system. What do we do now? And I think that's created some issues. We've had folks who've spent hundreds of dollars on trash cans, which then have had them broken, essentially, through the systems which all. And I think we need to have a little bit of a dialogue on, are we taking the right route on this? When we first passed this ordinance, we had a discussion saying, should the haulers be required to provide bear-resistant trash cans? Some haulers do, if for an extra cost, some don't. But at that point, there was quite a bit of dialogue with the haulers, and we decided not to include that requirement in there. And some of the companies were very, specific on why that wouldn't work for them, and timeframes and other things and costs. So, I think it's a good opportunity. We invited the companies which had licenses in Carbondale to participate in this discussion with you, so we can kind of, are we doing, is it working? Are there minor tweaks we can do to make it work better? Or is there a whole rewrite on this, which we need to do to make it more functional for our citizens and the companies which haul trash in the community? And I don't know if Gene had anything else to add on the enforcement side.
Just the only thing I would add is that we did have one citation that we issued that they chose to take the option of having the citation dismissed in lieu of buying a bear-proofed, bear-resistant. So.
Okay. Any other, last time we heard, you guys had given a lot of warnings and lots of, 700 notices. Any other feedback or data you have for us? No?
Not right now.
Okay. And how is John's still not here? I was going to ask about the bear activity since we've had this discussion.
It's still going on.
Yeah.
Over the week, we had a couple more that were entered. So I know, what night was it? Saturday. In my neighborhood, we had 2 trash cans that were entered, one at a residence and one at the Blue Lake Preschool. And the Blue Lake Preschool, we had not given them warnings, and they'd been keeping theirs inside, and they put them outside. So we went and talked to them on Monday morning about, put a secure facility. And then the other one was a residence that hadn't been warned, and we went and gave them a warning on putting them in somewhere secure.
Okay.
And I think in discussions with John, and he'll be here shortly, hopefully, but he's classified kind of an all-time high on bear activity. It hasn't dropped down. A lot of activity right on our outskirts, which is also an issue because our ordinances don't apply. So basically along the Crystal River in those areas, which are outside of town, and then the area behind Garcia's and manufactured housing project, and around our wastewater plant, there's still very high bear activity levels.
Okay. I thought it'd be useful to hear from the haulers and get their perspective, but before we do that, does anybody have any questions of Jay or Gene or comments? and then Ben.
So how many warnings have we issued now? We're at 80 the last time.
Oh, I don't know, Frosty, I didn't do numbers.
Okay. Well, can I get that or whenever you get a chance?
Yes, we can.
Because it's on a spreadsheet, right?
Yeah, we have a spreadsheet which added with every warning on it.
And then and hopefully that we'll take those where we've got landlords that'll carry forward to the next bear season, so we don't have to give them another warning, right, on the landlord if it's a landlord and not a tenant.
I don't know if we have a breakdown on landlord or if it's a rental or not in the warning tickets we've issued. We've been able to clarify which side or who's responsible for the trash removal in that unit.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but when we passed this ordinance, we had a lot of discussion on the fact about letting the $100 credit bear-resistant, bear-proof container for a reason, because we were going to be issuing tickets, not warnings, and that's my memory of this. So I emailed John last night and asked him if there's anything that he thought we needed to emphasize, and he said he was in training all day. He'd be here as soon as he could. I'm sure he told you the same thing, but that we had to control our trash, and he really would like us to do something with chickens. I think most people, at least the people I see that have the chickens, do have electric wire, because if you don't, coons and not just bears get their chickens, which if you're raising them, you don't want that to happen. But at any rate, but I'm curious to hear from the haulers as well about, do we move towards this isn't working, what we've done? Maybe it's time to require the haulers to put the containers out there. I think it's our responsibility, though, to control our trash. So I heard George Newman one time, I don't remember what meeting it was, and he said he would always speak for the animals, and as y'all will find out, I will also, because I have that's the way I'm wired, so I don't have any choice but to speak for them. They were here before us, and we have a responsibility to them, not to have to kill them because of our neglect and irresponsibility. So,
Trustee Ben.
Just as far as process, just for us to all keep in mind, and for the haulers to keep in mind, that we're going to go into about waste hauling ordinance 2 weeks from now. So if we don't resolve that part tonight, I imagine it might be folded into that. And then as we talk about the trash issue, I think we also need to leave some other issues like chickens, compost. Those seem to be the other big attractants that we can control. And with trash, it seems like that's split into residential and commercial. And I'd like to hear about which one, if we're having problems on both sides of that, address them differently. And then with there's storage, and then there's pickup day. And I think I would consider myself until this year guilty of thinking of it only as a pickup day issue, that it wouldn't be real secure, but I wouldn't have it out on the street. But the bear doesn't really care, on the side of my house. It's just as accessible, and this year is like the year that everybody should be waking up. But I think I'm curious how much of the issue is when the container's out on the curb and not bear-proof, also being, accessed by bears because it's not in a garage or a shed. I'm just sort of curious about all that from everybody's perspective that has experience with it.
So, are you asking that to the board right
now?
No,
I'm just putting that out there as, structurally, as we talk about this, that we keep in mind that we're going to have a deeper discussion about waste hauling in general 2 weeks from now. Right. And that we kind of look for those different parts of this issue.
Right. Okay. That's what I can. So, I'm guessing we have some haulers here. I see the waste management shirt there.
Marty has his hand up too.
Oh, Marty, sorry.
Yeah, just actually a very quick comment. We've been reactive on this, and I don't know if this has been the history in the past, and I'd like to at least think about being more proactive. So instead of the instance of waiting for the instances of bears in town, seems to me this is kind of a seasonal thing. So no matter what we do, we could be more proactive towards the education and the giving out the informational letters, and the warnings instead of waiting for it to happen.
We actually started way before we had it in town.
Did we?
Giving out, yeah, we were using the stickers at that point in time.
Okay.
But, so we usually, what happens is we have a big bear year, and then it drops off a couple years, and then we have another big bear year. So, I mean, I think you're right. We'll do a press release and, with trash cans, but it doesn't usually hit the board's level till we end up in a bad bear year. And usually, according to John, we might just have a couple bears in a regular year in Carbondale, where at a given time right now, there's 8 to 12 bears being active in Carbondale. So exponential growth in bear activity this season versus even big years we've had in the past. So there's a lot going on out there, which is beyond our regular stuff. We have ordered new cans for Silvers Park, bear-resistant cans. We had some money in the conservation. And then in the draft budget, you'll see in a couple weeks, there'll be kind of the next phase of park phase, switching out trash cans. But we'll have miners, staircase, and by the end of this year, Sopris with all bear-resistant trash cans.
Thank you for doing that. If y'all would like to join us at this table up here, and we can kind of turn it into a discussion. I appreciate you coming, and I think I just welcome your thoughts. You've heard the discussion of what we're debating, what to do. This board hasn't been privy, except for Frosty, to previous discussions of what's feasible, what's like for the customers, and just let us know your thoughts.
For waste management, we offer, we no longer sell bear cans. We used to sell them for $360 a piece, but we will lease a can for $10 a month. If a bear destroys that can or damages that can, we replace it for free.
Okay.
So it raises your rates $10 a month.
In perpetuity?
Yes, and it's a DOW approved bear can. It's resistant to a bear for an hour.
Okay.
So it's not just with clips. The whole lid shuts down, and it takes an hour for a bear to get into it.
Okay.
So usually by that time they give up. I have a bear toter at my house, and I've never had a problem. My neighbors' bears have dragged trash into my yard several times, but with my can I've been knocked over, but they can't get in.
I haven't gotten through.
They chew the corner and they chew the sides, and they usually give up, But
Okay.
with the $10, you'll never own the can.
Right.
But so that would take about 3 years to pay for the can. But in that 3 years, you might need to replace that can, once or twice, and we're going to pay for that. But if you own that can, you'd have to replace it yourself each time.
Okay.
So that can's going to cost you each time you replace it.
If I was a waste management customer and I wanted to buy my own and risk having to replace it, would you give me the specifications of a can and tell me where to buy that?
That would be up to you in the city.
But how would we know it would be compatible with your trucks?
Every can is compatible. It's just open the lids. We don't have any automatic.
I see,
Not automatic side loads. All of our routes in this town are rear load, and it would be no problem.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was kind of confused when you said that there was some haulers that they couldn't service bear-proof cans.
Yeah, so it just takes a little bit longer, but it's not that we can't service them. It's no problem.
Okay. I'm sorry, I know we've met before.
Mike with Mountain Waste and Recycling.
Thanks, Mike.
And I've worked at both sides. I've worked for Waste. I'm the district manager for Mountain Waste and Recycling. And Danny and I were in the position where we get to hear all the stories from these homeowners, commercial accounts, and converting cans to, let's talk about commercial cans. We have a lot of commercial accounts in town, from here to Aspen. When you convert a commercial dumpster into a bear-proof container, a bear-proof dumpster, you have metal lids. We get the calls from the elderly that can't lift the lids.
Yeah.
We get calls from the parents where the kids just smash their fingers because they're required to have bear-proof containers. We get those calls. So I understand the ordinance. I understand trying to work with the local jurisdictions and the law enforcement to do what's right. When it comes down to taking care of the community, if a customer wants to pay a fine versus having their kids' fingers smashed, there's a lot of senior housing here in this valley where a lot of these residents, they cannot lift these metal lids.
Yeah, we have that same problem. They'll call and say, we need a bear-proof can. We give them a bear-proof can, and they call and they say, we can't lift the lids.
There are a lot of elderly and kids that can't open the bear-proof latch.
Have you guys had any discussions with the manufacturers to come up with a different design?
There's many different designs.
Yeah.
We have a couple designs. Right now, there's one that we use in Vail on our bear-proof commercial cans that we kind of build like a H. Steel on the outside and then plastic on the outside, so that it makes the lid a little bit lighter, but it's still very hard for the bears to get into. And Vail, but I mean, I don't know if they've approved it here or not.
They have not approved it. From my understanding, they haven't approved it. In the
And that's
software
something
aspect.
that we have to build ourselves. So that takes
a lot of
time, money. I mean, every time you replace, if you're going from a non-bear-proof can, I would say to deliver it, to make it and everything, it's going to cost us about $600.
There's a lot more involved than just the material.
Okay.
It's the assembly, the time to swap them out, repainting, restick. There's a lot more than just, I want bear-proof lids instead of plastic lids. There's a whole lot more involved in that.
So what would it look like if I was a commercial customer and said, I really want a bear-proof can? Do you lease them? Do I have to buy it?
We usually replace them, and I think we charge about $150 delivery fee, and we'll go ahead and build it for them.
Bear-proof containers obviously goes up and is charged to the commercial account.
So it's an additional fee to have the bear-proof container like it would be for the residential?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Not for waste management, no.
Not for waste management.
But the cost
to build it and to deliver it, so we're going to charge another $150 to deliver that, and the cost to dump it is going to be the same.
Yeah. The service fees are the same.
It doesn't cost any more to service that can.
Okay.
The upgrading container size is the cost difference.
Okay. Well, Heather, I'll get to you in just a second. It doesn't sound like it costs more to service a residential can. You're just the additional cost of the
can.
Yeah. So for residential.
The main thing, the email that I got, the main concern was residential accounts. With people not having their 96 gallon toters bear proof. So to get the toters bear proof, like we said, we charge a month, and then if a bear destroys that can, we'll replace that can for free.
Okay.
No charge.
Heather.
So to that point, like in a place, basalt, let's say, where it's required that if you provide a can, it has to be a bear.
Still not required in basalt. It's only required in Aspen.
Okay. You service Aspen?
We service Aspen, yeah, and that is the only place that is definitely guaranteed we cannot deliver a non-bear-proof can to Aspen.
No questions asked.
And so does that homeowner still basically have to pay the 10 opted into the rates?
Yes, ma'am.
They're not renting it, it's just their can, but
they're leasing it, yeah, and it's the same thing with a lease. It's like, you pay $10 a month, so it's going to take 3 years of service, 36 months to pay for that can, but during that 36 months, that's destroyed twice by a bear, but we're going to replace it for free both times.
Okay. Mark?
That $10 a month is in perpetuity, right? So 5 years can hasn't been replaced, you pay 120 times $600.
Correct.
Okay. And on the
kind of like insurance, kind of like having insurance,
Okay. But on the commercial side, you're just charging them a one-time fee for constructing the dumpster to the bear-proof specifications.
Right.
But their monthly fee is staying the same.
Correct.
The service is the service. It's just the upgrade for the cost of being able to deliver.
Right, and the size.
Yep.
Yeah. It doesn't cost any more to dump it or for landfill fees, no.
Okay. Sounds like there's the opportunity for them to destroy a residential one, but there isn't on the commercial. So
But we have a lot of customers that call and say, "Hey, this bear destroyed my can," and it's like, "Well, you guys own that can, so that's not our responsibility."
Okay.
So if they lease it from us, then we will replace it.
Okay. Gene?
Mountain waste the same as
No.
$10 a month or house?
Mountain waste, no. Mountain waste does not, right at this current time, we do not provide. We have critter carts where they have the metal cables, and those are not, those do not pass the standard. So we are looking at getting a sales tax license as well as being able to lease or sell containers to our residential.
They're not bear proof.
Just
you have to have the complete steel around the edges.
Okay. So what would one of your customers do if they said, "I absolutely want a bear-resistant can"? Would you say, "Sorry, we can't help you," or you go buy your own and we'll
we're deferring them to Ace Hardware, Lowe's, wherever they can find one.
All right. So if a bear destroys that can, the customer has to replace it.
Right. Ben?
We've talked a lot about the cost of a bear-proof container. What's the cost of a non-bear-proof container? I mean, that's not zero.
Zero.
Well,
it's not zero to us, but it's zero to the customer.
We supply it with their service.
So you work base fee.
Correct.
Right, that cost. I mean, that's
A
got to be significant
non-bear-proof
cost.
can probably costs $40.
$40, okay. So it's that big of a difference, $40.
Proof can's $360.
Okay.
If you can find one now.
Yeah, they're hard to find.
Resistant ones.
No, it's bear-proof. No. Bear resistant is just clips. That's like a varmint resistant.
So they do make bear-proof cans.
Make bear-proof, DOW approved cans. I have one in my truck if you guys want to see it.
Other questions? So
in the commercials, that's where the kids are smashing their fingers or pinching their fingers, and the elderly aren't able to do
the 2, 3, 4 yard cans. Yeah.
So just roughly, do you have any idea how many people that affects? It's not every commercial carrier, obviously.
No, I'd say it's probably 15 to 20% of our customers.
Yeah, I'd say closer to 25%. You got a lot of multi-family housing, apartment complexes, condos.
Oh, I got you. So
senior housing areas.
25% of your customers using commercial cans. Okay.
25% of our commercial customers are having issues with.
I'm sorry.
Correct. Are having issues with the metal lids. I have a lot of that happening. All the way from Aspen down to Parachute.
Okay.
Yeah. Just because they can't lift the lids. Because they can't lift the lids and put the trash in at the same time.
Right.
And there's a reason why they specifically wanted the non-bear-proof or the plastic lids for.
Okay. It's disappointing that the industry hasn't tried to address that yet. I know that problem is not insurmountable, so I'd hate to. Well, it's just disappointing that we haven't been an accessible bear-proof can. I know it's easier said than done. I don't have a good design for it, but it seems like that's something we can design.
I think the hybrid plastic steel is the answer. It's just getting DOW to approve that can, and they have approved that. It's kind of like an infrastructure. It's like an H that covers all the inside, and the bears can still kind of get into the plastic, but they have to get through the corrugated steel to get to the trash.
It's a metal H frame underneath that's attached to the plastic.
And it cuts the weight about in half.
And what are they using in Aspen for the commercial boxes?
It's all steel.
It's all steel.
Steel is chains and everything like that.
I did find a company. It's called Wastequip, and we've been getting a lot of our larger cans. They're flat top. A lot of larger commercial dumpsters are flat top, and they got the side slide doors. So it seems to be helping a little bit, where we're not pinching fingers and some of the movement, but they're having difficulty.
And the side slide is pretty much basically on a front load can. So if it's a rear load can, you can't do side swipe.
Yeah.
A lot of the alleys and stuff, and the tight alleys you can't get a front load into. It's got to be rear load.
Low hanging wires, you can't use a front load truck. So depends on the application, depends on the geographic area and serviceability of that area.
Okay. Bring you up to speed. We've kind of had some questions. These guys have shared their thoughts on what it looks like now to offer bear-proof containers and what it might look like in the future. And now you're here. So
my apologies.
That's okay.
Running behind it. A little ahead of schedule.
We understand. We've definitely heard from you in the past. You've been emphatic that it's an issue we need to deal with, and the way you deal with it is keeping trash out of the hands of bears. But anything else you'd like to add?
No, honestly, that's the first step. As long as the trash availability is there, the bears are going to come. Maybe not every year, but in a year like this, as we see with more than the norm, it's trash is the major attractant for them to come into town.
Right.
However we can slow that down, get it down. Another thing too is just the ordinance is there. We don't have a bad barrier. People get lax, and then we're to the point we are now where we're being very reactive instead of proactive on the issue. It needs to be not once every 3-year deal, it needs to be at the forefront of people's minds every summer that they need to be taking care of this. Otherwise, we are going to have issues.
And if I remember,
I know they put an hour on it now, so you can't have your trash out before 6 a.m. and it can't be out past
6 p.m. or 7 p.m.
6 p.m. 8 p.m. But that gives 14 hours to a bear to get to that can. I mean, I think that everybody should be bear proof.
What do you think?
I think everything should, at some point in time, be bear proof. I mean, residential. But some other feedback I'm hearing from residential, the lower income housing or affordable housing in Carbondale makes up what percentage of all of Carbondale? 70%?
That's an impossible.
We lose customers on a daily basis, weekly basis, going to our smaller competitors because they're offering such a lower rate.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't offer a bear-proof container. And like I said, I'm looking at getting into a situation where we can offer bear-proof containers.
Okay.
But adding additional fees, $10, $5, people are strapped as it is with the cost of living, transportation. We lose customers on a basis. They play the game back and forth, the introductory prices. They jump from hauler to hauler to get the cheapest rate because that's all they can afford.
Right.
And adding prices on, they're going to continue to hop from hauler to hauler. Right. So basically it's going to come down to what is your ordinance going to be? What is your expectation for bear proof? We are having issues with commercial accounts. So setting that expectation and us haulers abiding by your expectation or your ordinance is where it's going to come down to.
But what I'm hearing from you is if we were to require bear-proof containers in a certain amount of time, it's feasible. We're not asking for the impossible. It would be an added cost to someone, but it's feasible. Okay.
And at $10 a month, it's like, so if you're going to pay $350 for a can, so that's going to take you $10 a month at least for 36 months. So we've got at least 25% of the customers that bear cans are calling and saying they need repairs in their cans. And if they own that can, they have to pay for it. If they lease it from us, then it's paid for. Yeah. It's kind of like an insurance policy.
Yeah. Jay?
And just to clarify, our current ordinance requires bear-proof resistant, depending on the term you're using, for cans which are left outside on a regular basis, other than the ones which can be secured elsewhere.
They can leave them out after 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., no problem.
Yeah.
If they leave them out before 6 a.m., then it does have to be bear-proof.
Correct. So that's how we require it if you're going to leave it out on a regular basis. And many of our deed-restricted affordable units in town weren't done with garages or were done with single-car garages, which are full. And you end up with cans, left out on and our higher density neighborhoods on the residential side are the areas we see the biggest challenges for enforcement. Neighborhoods where they just roll it out of their garage at 6 in the morning, we don't have too many issues with.
Well, one time last year, in my neighborhood, on trash day, or maybe more, I don't know, hit every trash can. They just went right down the street and went from one can to the other. And every trash can in my neighborhood were out at the legal time, but the bear hit them all. So I think that, I agree that I think the way to go is to require that the haulers, or however you want to do it, we require bear-proof containers wherever that is. And one of the other things I put in the memo was also we have residents, John, whoever was talking about price jumping, where we have people that do not have trash service. And I think we also need to look at that. And I don't know where the ins and outs are, whether it's something billed through the town, every water customer, but I think we require that we have the trash service in town. And then what Jay talked about when we first started this, we need to discuss about compost and the other things that are attractants that bring the bears into town too, and how we deal with that.
Marty?
Two things. On a humorous note, your bear was smarter than the average bear to know when trash day was and just go down the block and hit its garbage container. On a serious note, I'm just putting this on a level, I understand. I'm paying roughly $150 a quarter for my garbage service. So $10 a month is about a 20% increase, right?
Yep.
Okay. Then it becomes a value judgment for us as a board. Is it worth it? Is this what we want to do? Understanding that, you know, $10 a month, much, but to some people it is.
Well, you either pay $10 a month or you pay $350 up front.
Right. Or, worst case scenario, you get a ticket and you pay for the citation, and the bear gets hurt.
You really want that bear to die.
Right. So, just a value judgment on what's more important to you.
Okay. You could also change the value on that.
That's right. I mean, we could change it to $250 or $500.
And they could fine you every week.
So, no, I understand. I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm just saying what it's going to cost. You know, like you said, when you got people struggling, and like Gene said, if people come from hauler to hauler to try to save the $10 a month, you know, what's going to happen when we raise it $10 a month? I mean, because we see this problem even where I work at the post office. People come in and dump stuff in our dumpster after the building is closed and on Sunday.
But, you know, hey, for that $10 a month, we're also taking the risk, because if that customer has a bear attack their can 7 times in a year, we have to replace that can 7 times. That's $2,400 for us.
Understood. Yeah. But hopefully, if we do it in such a way so that's required of everyone, there'll be a disincentive for the bears to come to town.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, I think that's, when we talk about the cost, it's easy to overlook why we're doing it. And John has said that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's likely that if a bear gets caught once, chances are that bear's going to die. So, you know, there's a significant consequence to the wildlife that we're not really. It's impossible to weigh in on the financial equation.
But if they come into town and they find 5, 6 garbage cans they can't get into, maybe they're going to give up. Maybe.
Yep. So we have a couple of options. We could do nothing and hope that our ordinance works and bears stop visiting our town. We can strengthen the penalties. More tickets, we can get more aggressive. We can offer a phased incentive. You know, maybe we find some way to incent bear-proof containers. Maybe it's a phased implementation where they're not required for a year, but from now until then, or we could go hard with a requirement, you know, with an ordinance. Anybody have any thoughts on those options?
If I might offer one thing, we're probably teaching a generation or two of bears right now to come into town. They have found that there's food here. Even if you shut it off right now, you're going to continue to have bears. This generation, the cubs, whatever that's in town right now, they're going to come back into town. Without basically 100% getting that shut down, you're going to have some sort of bear in town. So, but once the trash ordinance, if people are getting the issue under hand, if we have to move some bears out of here, it's likely we're going to have to move to the point, because we are. I mean, we've seen it in Aspen where there's 3, 4, 5 generations of bears that learn to get into stuff. Then it escalates into breaking into houses, other options. And basically, as long as there's a trash availability, someone back in town.
Mike and then Heather.
How many total residents in the town of Carbondale that this ordinance affects? 5,000? 6,500?
3,000 households.
Okay. So roughly 5,000
city limits.
Inside of city limits. How many total bear issues did you have this summer? Total bear situations.
I know of at least a dozen bears in town throughout my district, which is the whole Crystal. I've got 40 different bears easily causing issues right now.
Right in the town of Carbondale?
Not in town. In town.
In the town of Carbondale. I'm just trying to get some information.
Probably about a dozen.
A dozen situations.
Yeah, different bear.
That's the same thing with Aspen. It's town proper that they require that you have bear proof. It just has to be within the Aspen city limits. So if they're asking just to be within the Carbondale city limits.
Although Pickens County does have a bear ordinance as well, where Garfield.
Yes.
Okay.
So John, this question is for you. So Aspen, that like generations of bears, right? So there's pretty strict, right? All the way from trash to in I'm going to go somewhere with this because it's trees, right? And so this very strict ordinance that they've had up valley for 20?
Hasn't been that long.
10?
Yeah, probably. I don't know the time frame.
So their swings, almost kind of as far as you could go as far as residential containers, commercial containers. You can't plant a fruit tree in the city of Aspen, in Pickens County, fruiting bushes, trees. I don't think you can maintain chickens either at all. So I don't know that one for sure, but about effectiveness, right? 10 years, pretty strict. Enforcement is maybe part of the issue. Does it solve the issue? I mean, does it really, does it go away in the bad bear years? Like, so talk a little bit, been in place for quite a while and like your observations on it.
I wouldn't say Aspens, in any bad food forage year for bears, we're going to have a few issues. Sometimes they do a good job, but when you drive down Main Street and you still have crabapple trees in front of the courthouse with bears in them every day, there's more that could be done. But there's a big difference between the habitat in Aspen where the bears are coming in and versus the habitat in Carbondale where they're traveling across a lot of country to get into town of basically non-bear habitat stuff that they wouldn't normally be in. Where Aspen is, it's right there. The interface is right there. They're always, even in the good food going through town, they're just sticking to the natural forage. Even, our radio collar study up there showed in a good food year, they would just stay to Hunter Creek and all the different creeks going through there. But when food supplies got low, then they go back out to find other stuff. Where I've been in Carbondale this 14th year, typically a lot of years we have no bears in town, one or two maybe at most. This year with the food failure, they're here, they found food, they're going to be back. I think it would be because if they start coming into town in June and there's not food available, they're going to go elsewhere to try to forage.
Here's the thing too, you got a 500-600 pound bear, you can get into anything.
Yeah, hold up.
And so up valley, do you remove a bear that would stick to quote-unquote natural forage? I mean, a service bear, something that would be planted in town or in county limits and around humans, but they're not in trash, they haven't entered a building or anything like that. Do you remove bears?
Typically, no. Pretty much up valley right now, all we're doing is trapping bears that are into houses. That's because we don't have the manpower or the situation to, it's impossible to try to catch every bear just because it's hanging around town. If the bear hasn't done anything, why are we going to give it a strike? It's just doing its natural thing. When they start escalating that, breaking it, we have to step in and do more.
Thanks.
John, I want to grill you a little bit more with Heather's question, though. So it's good to know the habits of the bears up there, but can you say with confidence that the bear-proof containers has minimized bear issues up there?
I would say so. If you look at Snowmass Village, who was very proactive on it and very strict on their enforcement, we had very few issues out of Snowmass Village.
Okay. So the enforcement part is part of it, for sure.
It is.
Okay. Okay.
But Snowmass also has centralized trash collection, right?
And some
block by block.
Yep.
So it makes enforcement pretty easy.
Compound enclosures for all their residential condos.
Yeah.
But they've been active on the bear issue.
Yeah.
It's like we need to take these steps, and it's actually helped immensely on what they've done.
Jay, are you suggesting a whole other alternative that we start?
No, but we actually had that proposal last time we had this discussion was that we should look at a whole different model, and that just seemed over.
Right.
What was
it did
the,
come up. Where you end up
enclosures.
with block by block trash, centralized trash service in each kind of area, which Snowmass Village does. So you'll have, each block will have a secure compound with bear-proof containers inside.
Oh, I thought you were saying they talked about the town getting in the hauling business.
No, I was talking more on that we actually had a proposal last time to look at how do we divvy up the town and do more
There's
centralized
certain
collection.
neighborhoods that have an enclosure.
Yeah.
That's where they got like three yarders. They got another enclosure where they have three yarders. So they bring the trash from their house down to the enclosures. Yeah.
Right.
I wanted to elaborate on Heather's thoughts on bear activity, and it's been there for 10 years. They've enforced, I think it was 2006 when they finally went everything bear-proof in the city of Aspen. They don't require, the only thing they don't require in the city of Aspen is the recycle containers. Those don't have to be. So now they're starting to get into the recycle containers, and we're starting to get requests to make those bear-proof. And you can elaborate on waste management, but the amount of repairs that we have to do to go and fix damage from bear is in the city of Aspen. We are constantly, I would say 8 to 10 phone calls a day to go up and literally a bear will reach in and all he has to do is get a couple of fingernails in and he will roll those metal lids back like a sardine can. So is it bear proof? Is it bear resistant? If he wants in, he's going to get in.
But basically, on the recycle cans, all that we provide is usually a bear bar and plastic lids. So they'll get inside the plastic lids, they'll tip the can over, there's nothing in there. They don't care. So maybe they won't come back to that can all the time. But put a bear bar, not the metal lids.
Okay. So we have 20, 30 minutes that we can devote to this conversation. Let's bring it back to the board and talk about what we want to do.
I think there's, again, this immediate need to have more enforcement and more information and outreach about getting through the rest of this season. And then I think we need to roll this into, I don't think we're going to get bear-proof containers out to make an impact this season, right? That's not going to happen. So I think that we're having a long-term discussion, but we're really focused on this short-term phenomenon that's going on right now. So I think we need some outreach and some immediate actions and of what we've got in place now. But then I think we need to roll this conversation. I think this is a really good informational kind of foundation to start 2 weeks from now, a general waste hauling discussion, and this is one component of it, that this will really help inform that about, and I think that ultimately we do need, it sounds like there's a pretty broad agreement even from the haulers that we need to go toward bear-proof containers universally in town, and then so the question is how we get there, and I think is what needs to be rolled into a broader waste management sort of waste hauling discussion that has other components to it as well that we have on our agenda 2 weeks from now.
So I think that's what we can do tonight is, I don't think we're going to nail everything down to the letter, but it would be good to know where everybody stands. Do we want to move maybe, within a short time period, is there support to move towards required bear-proof containers and then address the chicken issue as well? If you just want to follow up, Tusu, but Marty.
Yeah, I would just say yes. I think my opinion is that yes, direction. I think as we roll it into a bigger discussion, I think the incentives have to be in the right place. Like right now, it's, as these guys have told us, there's a disincentive to do what's right. You have to pay extra to do what's right. And so I think that that's going to become a big part of when we have a discussion where we can organize things in some way where everybody is able to recycle and have things bear proof and compost and do all those sorts of things without it being a lot of extra money.
Marty.
Well, I think we have to make our fines, raise them, so that it'd be more of a disincentive. I mean, $100 for the first fine, some people get their attention. Some people will just brush it off. I think we need to raise that first fine as part of an overall strategy of dealing with. Is we need to go to bear-proof containers, at least for residential, on a town-wide basis. Okay, and like I said, it's going to raise the cost for people. for some people who are low income, it's going to be difficult, but I think to pay. I'm with Frosty on this. I hate to see animals pay for human misconduct or inaction. It isn't their fault, it's our fault. And if that can be corrected for $10 a month, so be it. You know? But I am sensitive to the fact that for some people, lower income people, it's not a hardship, but it's $10 a month for that. It's this fee got raised, utility bill went up. It's a cumulative effect. And it costs more to live here. And it's already difficult for many people to live here. But I do think we need to look at raising the offenses, what they cost. Maybe the money raised from the offenses to, pay for those people who can't afford the extra $10 a month.
Okay. Quick question. If we required bear-proof containers, that obviously changes your analysis. All of a sudden, you've got X customer paying that $10 as opposed to maybe a few. Is it possible you would lower that if we required bear-proof containers because of economies of scale?
It's actually better for us for that, because then we know that every customer is covered by that. Just pay, like, in Aspen, we have that problem because we have, like, older customers that bought their own cans, and then now they're going to say they want them replaced, but they're not under that new lease program. So I think in Carbondale, it would be better if everybody's had that program. And I can't really say they would lower that price. They're basing it on a 36-month contract.
Yep.
So that's $360 what the can costs, and $10 a month. So I would have to get back to you on that question. Over that.
Cost of doing business with converting everybody in the city limits to a bear-proof container. So there's 2,600 homes, and my company services about 80% of those homes. So that would be a huge cost to my company.
Right. Well, the alternative, I'm just thinking out loud here, is for us to facilitate a bulk purchase for Carbondale residents that may or may not reduce their out-of-pocket expense. So I'm just trying to think about different options. But let's talk about Erica.
So it sounds like a lot of our warnings and our fines are in our neighborhoods. That mostly, I remember when I saw the list, it was mostly, it looked like a lot of Drive.
Yeah, I think our first
We have them
ones.
all over, but there's a lot over there.
Yeah.
I actually live in Carbondale. I actually got a sticker on my can saying that I was going to get fined, and it's like, I have a bear-proof can. Why would I get fined? They put the big orange sticker on there. So maybe they're not educated on the cans that are DFW approved.
Right.
Yeah. The same thing. We've been getting customer-approved dumpsters that have these big orange stickers on them. You need to get a bear-proof can, or you're going to get fined. But it's already a bear-proof container.
Gina, we've been putting stickers on dumpsters, or?
Not that I know of.
Yeah, I thought we got away from stickers a while back.
We still do stickers, but on cans.
On cans.
Yeah, on my 90-gallon can in my house, yeah.
That's bear-proof already.
Yeah.
He had it out at 558 instead of 6 o'clock.
But if it's bear-proof, you can.
But bear-proof's allowed.
Because of the bridge, I got to be over at 3 a.m. So I wake up at 2, I got to be out at 3. I'm not going to make my wife take out the trash, so I take out the trash, but I have a bear-proof can. And I actually, Gretchen, the police officer, she emailed me. Well, I emailed her back after they left the notice on my door, and she said it was okay to leave it out. So.
Right.
I do think that $100 for your first offense, $250 for your second, and $500. I think I don't have any friends that would brush that off. And so I think our fines are fine. It doesn't sound like we've had to get to that point very often. If we had a bunch of people just paying the fines, then I think we would see a case to want to raise them. And I was just bringing up the high-density neighborhoods because that is where a lot of our renters are, and that's what we've identified is a lot of the people getting the warnings might not have lived here before and just moved here from someplace else where they've never had bears. So they actually literally don't know that is a problem. So I think I would be fine leaving the fines the same. I agree with Ben. I think it's a long-term picture for what we want to do. I mean, it doesn't even sound like if we said, okay, next week, we want to provide bear-proof containers, implement now, that would be a huge burden on our haulers. So I don't think we can make something happen this bear season. But I would support looking into what that requiring them for everybody. Because I do think you pay, I mean, I pay extra for compost pickup. It does add up, but if it's another extra for a bear-proof container, that would make it much easier for us to take on rather than us going out and buying our own. So
are you thinking that you might want us to require bear-proof containers as early, or you're saying you're not sure yet?
I think as early as next spring.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Heather and Luis, what do you bet? I know where Frosty is on this, but.
I'm curious, question for Mike. How long would it take to, say, supply all the households in Carbondale to implement with, if there was an ordinance that would call bear-proof containers?
It would probably, we do 80% of 2,400 homes. We're looking at probably 6 semi-loads of bear-proof containers and then assembling them. You're probably looking at 60 to 90 days to get the carts here, and then probably another 30 to 45 days to get them dispersed.
Just curious. I mean, I'm definitely leaning towards the school of thought that we have to go with bear-proof containers throughout. It may not be popular, but I think it's the right thing to do in order to, as John brought up, discourage future generations of bears from continuing down. It's obviously very striking that in Aspen, yeah, they're going to come through no matter what because the habitat's so close, but to have them go from so far to come here, they found a food source and they're going to keep coming back.
Yep. Okay. Heather, where are you on this?
I mean, I support, well, I'm trying to figure out and clarify, that we have a certain ordinance in place, right? So if there are issues right now in residential areas, there's an element of examples of the bear cleaning out a neighborhood from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. But the vast majority of the issue, because we do have an existing ordinance, is about enforcement. I know that I support raising the fines, but I too think it's a ticket. I mean, just limited warnings and here's your ticket. And so then there is the word that sort of spreads as somebody then takes advantage and goes, oh man, I'm gonna towards the bear-proof, etc. Because if we put an ordinance in place that's even stronger, but we still don't enforce that, and that's been the issue in some of the other municipalities, is that's great, it gets put in place, but enforcement is spotty, and so the issues still exist. So, I mean, I definitely support moving forward a discussion. I too think it's wrapped into whether there are going to be changes to the haulers, our kind of approach to haulers overall. And so for me, the devil is in the details as to whether I would support the how to do it. I don't know. I mean, mandated transitions of sort of 3 semi-truck loads. I'm not really sure how that goes down. Who bears the cost of that? Things like that. So I support an aspect of this, but I also think everything, so much of this, being able to enforce what we have in place, and I just really do. I mean, we need to make sure that everybody's educated on what qualifies and what they're enforcing and things like that. But I really, especially because that is gonna be what makes the difference in the next 2 months, is that ticket slapped on their front door. And I'm fine with it being $100. I'm pretty sure that's gonna get, of the 2,600 units in town, that's gonna get everybody's attention.
But I just gotta ask, do you guys really have an officer out there at 5 o'clock in the morning going around to find out?
Yes, we do.
You do?
Hold on,
Okay.
Gene. Hold on, Gene. Please don't interrupt Heather.
Oh, I thought she was done. I'm sorry.
So I'm very much focused on that right now, I'd really like to support that because I think that's the only thing that's going to make a difference in the next 2 months. And then I
Enforcement,
support,
is that what?
Yeah,
Okay.
enforcement. Just really, just go for it and put a ticket in. It'd be like rainbow colored. I mean, something that kind of puts the label on that, so everybody drives by and goes, "Is that rainbow colored?"
I'm Carbondale.
Yeah, it's purple with balloons. I mean, the big orange sticker, like, because if there can be a stigma of, and having your trash dumped in the middle of the street, right, because you put it out early is a pretty decent stigma as well, but follow it up with some heavy enforcement right now. And then I support looking at this 2 ways. One, as taller, because that's the one issue around bears, and then the rest of the pieces I'd really like to put kind of on a concurrent path. Chickens, compost, fruit trees, things like that. And trust me, I don't support the idea of no fruiting vegetation in town, but I want to make sure that that's on the agenda so that we talk about it, because I'm nervous it would sort of go there, and so I'd like to see those 2 things talked about concurrently then as we kind of move forward.
Okay, now go ahead and ask your
Oh,
question.
sorry. I just wondered if they were really enforcing it, like coming around and seeing who had the trash out.
Okay.
Like before 6 a.m.
And just to clarify, it's one of the reasons why early in the season we did the warnings and not went out and write tickets is you can do 50, 60, 80 warnings in the time that you can write 3, 4 because the tickets actually then have to be served. Then there's the follow-up with them. Then if they buy the bear-resistant trash can, it's a very time-consuming side. I mean, Gretchen could issue 3 or 4 tickets in a day, and that's going to be a good chunk of her enforcement morning.
Or the guys, it's very labor intensive. And, part of it is like he asked a question about 5 a.m. If your trash can's out at 3 in the morning and it's not bear-proofed and we go knock on your door in the middle of the night to issue a citation, we can do it. But remember that there's going to be some...
It's not the ticket on the door, it's the actual serving the ticket and the follow-up on it, which is the issue. And it's not an excuse not to do it, it's a time-consuming process, which is why if we can contact 80, 100, or 700 or 800 people up front on flyers, that's why we do that first.
Yeah, and I'm not being like judgmental. We've been, I think that's great, but we're gonna creep up on October, and so I think now just knowing, I mean, and maybe that's what other, like you kind of asked for the one way, and whether we can do that. I'd be hearing just, is there kind of full support of a little bit of full speed ahead, because yes, the knocking on the door, but I would imagine that also that word starts to get around. Yeah, people are going to complain, they're going to call up, and then this is the ordinance. We don't want bears killed in town, so you got a ticket. If they start spreading the word, there's no messing around anymore. Like, I got a ticket. And that takes time, right? But you think about a snow mass where enforcement is so strong, it's not a question anymore, right? Because that enforcement got ratcheted up over time where you just don't do it anymore. You just don't leave your trash out anymore. So, mine wasn't a judgment on.
No, I didn't mean to take it that way. Yeah. It was just like, it's the physical side of writing tickets. Something we're more than willing to do, and we'll assign the man hours, but it's not doing 40 or 50 tickets a day. It's single digits when you're doing that type of enforcement, because of how you have to follow up.
If we look at this ordinance down the road, maybe we talk to Mark about other options. Like a parking ticket, we don't have to serve on the person because we have rules in place that allow us to just put it on the car and it's the registered owner. I don't know.
That'd be interesting.
An option out there that says whoever the property owner is, we can send them the ticket in the mail and they're responsible. I don't know those questions, but it may be something that we can, the answers to those questions, but we may look at that as part of our ordinance as that we can just send them the notice in the mail, certified mail or something like that, that they have the citation. So there may be things that we can look at that may make it less labor intensive than the way we currently do it.
Erica, and then
things we can, and this I think is a question for John. We can do everything we want in the city limits, but the Bears don't really care about city limits. And I've got a number of friends over in Setank, and they are being hit heavily by bears. And I live over by behind City Market, and we haven't had any on my street yet, which I'm shocked by. And so we all of this, and you know, which obviously that's our jurisdiction. But I guess what do you do, or what does Garfield County do for Setank or behind Garcia's, you know, our really close neighbors who won't have these same regulations?
Trust me, that issue.
Yeah.
And we have talked to the county, tried to get them to enact a trash ordinance of some sort. I think they need to hear it again, but also from the community, Glenwood Springs, because they're going through the same issues where West Glenwood's all unincorporated Garfield County. But those issues exist, and that is something we hope to get them on board to go down that road as well, because it's like you said, I've been in that trailer park behind Garcia's and that many nights, and when you see 2 or 3 different bears coming for the dumpster at Garcia's and you're just chasing them away and they turn around and come right back. I mean, there's only so much you can do in a night.
Sorry, I never got your name.
Danny.
Danny, thank you.
So the one thing, like right now before Thanksgiving, is the bridge. So I know a lot of families are impacted, like me and my wife. My wife works at the hospital in Glenwood. She's the HR coordinator, and she has to be to work 2 hours early. I have to be to work 2 hours early. So I'm going to work. I'm waking up at 2:09. So I have to be to work at 3. She has got to be to work at 6. So neither one of us are there before 6 a.m. So I think that they might want to cut a break to some people right now where the bridge project is going on, because a lot of families, I mean, most households, everybody works. It's hard to get the trash out after 6 a.m. with certain jobs that people have.
Thank you. Quick question to Gene. So if we asked you for heightened enforcement through the winter, and especially in the next coming weeks, is that possible?
Yes.
Okay. Ben.
Well, the challenge of enforcing the current ordinance illustrates that there's fundamental flaws to it, and that's what will be hopefully rolled into a broader discussion about waste hauling. Like, we'll never be able to enforce probably things like I mentioned at my house, where we for trash in our shed, but it's an open to the outdoor shed, but it's behind a gate. You guys aren't going to be snooping around in my backyard on a, Thursday, but really. So the idea that like we can solve this through enforcement with our current situation, I think that that's the challenge. So I agree with let's do some more intense enforcement, but also agree with the fact that it's hard for people to comply, I think, right now in a lot of situations. And so I think we have to have a comprehensive approach where we require this across the board. It's not optional. It's not an extra fee. It's what you do here. And all the haulers are on board and all that. And for now, I actually think that I don't think that people are violating it because they're conscious of it and thinking they don't care about the bears. I think that people, even though all of us are really conscious and there have been a lot of warnings and all that, I think it's just not part of the way a lot of think. I really don't. I had a neighbor down my street where the bear got tranquilized out of the tree after flipping a chicken coop and eating a trash can last fall. And she had just moved here from Seattle a couple months earlier. She had no idea about any of this and left their trash out and all that. So I just think before we go with the heaviest hand and the tickets at 3 a.m. and waking people up and all that, I'm a little bit reluctant there. And I think that a lot of warnings, some more enforcement where people are just egregiously violating things, sure, go give them some tickets. But I think that we've got to kind of take some responsibility for this too as a town and put in place some systems that make it easier for people to do the right thing.
So we're winding down on time, and I'm hearing some common agreement. Throw out an idea where I am hearing that common agreement. I'm hearing that possibly from now and through maybe March, we ask the police to increase enforcement of the existing ordinance. While we do that, we inform the we're whatever the term is, likely, probably going to require bear-proof containers by the spring, so that people, one, that gives people a chance to weigh in. What are the hardships? What does that mean? Gives the haulers an opportunity to think about how it's going to be implemented. You've got some confidence that it's going to be implemented. We do have to, I think the town would have to do a really good job of getting that message out. During that time, we work on a comprehensive waste hauling ordinance, which we're talking about anyway, and obviously bear issues, chickens, whatever we want to include. And then we look to modifying, adopting something before April. And also during that time, needs to figure out a way to facilitate the container replacement. And I don't know what that means. It's probably not going to be a financial incentive, but it could be, like I said, a bulk purchase, arm wrestling with you guys to lower your fees, whatever it is. Maybe we come up with an implementation plan where certain neighborhoods get prioritized so that you're not trying to roll out new containers for the entire town. I don't know what that looks like, but I think the key to it is that we send a message this winter that changes are coming. So get ready, and we'll figure out what those changes are. Thoughts on that? Frosty?
So I think that sounds right. I mean, I would agree that out of this 80 warnings we had last week, which may be up to 150 now, we don't know, that 20 or 30% of those people know any better. We need to educate them. 20 or 30% of them don't really give a damn, and that the only way you're going to get their attention is hit them with the fine. And unfortunately, I've watched all this for a little longer than you guys have, and I think it's just going to take more enforcement to get of our current ordinance and then rolling forward with this comprehensive. I'm all for that. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the cub who got electrocuted and had to be put down may not have been in town had we been enforcing our ordinance, and the mom came back looking for that cub for at least one night, maybe two, because she spent hibernation with that cub. So she had feelings. She knew she lost a part of her life. So we need to understand that. These animals, I mean, they don't have feelings like us, but there are things going on there, and we owe them better than we're giving them right now.
Other thoughts on that plan, Marty?
Yeah, I agree with the more enforcement. I see just on Village Road, one individual who has an overflowing garbage can. I mean, overflowing to the point where they can't close the lid every garbage collection day. That's like an open invitation, even if you have it out after 6 a.m. I mean, that's just, am I right? That's just like saying, hey, there's food here, come get me. So enforcement, definitely. I just want to warn you, Frosty, you were the only one here on the board the last time there was a discussion about chicken and chicken coops. And I just remember it became quite contentious and couldn't be resolved in one meeting. So it's a discussion we need to have, because that's part of it. But I'm just warning you that that's going to be contentious. For the time being, is all we can do, and we need to look ahead. And this could be part of our discussion when we speak about overall waste hauling. I think one thing you should think about, and I think Erica brought this up, was a commitment. So whether it's over 6 months or over a year and a half, it's a big expense for the haulers, and a big commitment of time and manpower if they have to replace, however, 1,500 cans over a 3-month period. And if we did it in sections of town, that might be one way to approach it, just to think about.
Yeah, I envision that we send the message that change is likely coming next spring, and that may mean the beginning approach to bear-proof containers, or it may be, boom, April 1st, bear-proof containers are required. But I think that'll get people thinking and gives us time to think about a more comprehensive ordinance.
I know we're out of. Really quick question to clarify. When everybody's talking about increased enforcement, which part are you talking about? Are you talking about if somebody puts it out at 5 a.m. instead of 6, or if they bring it in at 8:30 instead of 8? Like, that's working at the margins. And if it's out there for 14 hours legally, I just don't see that making it. Or are we mostly talking about people who the night before? Like, which part do we want Gene's team to focus on? Because I hear this concern that I just don't see them out there with a full court press at 3 a.m. getting the people who had to leave work early for work because of the bridge. Like, what are we talking about? Increased enforcement in the short term. What specific behavior?
I would answer that by saying we'd ask Gene to work with John and target the most vulnerable situations.
Right.
And
That'll
right
work
now,
for me.
just so you know what we've done, you know, if it's outside by a couple hours, it's usually a sticker. The citations we've written have been for containers that are actually outside of the day. If, you know, if,
that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And we got with the waste haulers and asked them what days they picked up in what part, so we know, you know, what their trash days are, and, you know, if they're out the next morning, so to speak, or they're out the night before, then those are the ones that we've been trying to deal with citation.
Thank you.
Okay, just real quickly, Kevin, Jay, Gene, any issues with the kind of the guidance we're providing here?
No, maybe we also engage the county on this discussion because we're just putting a little finger in the dike here in the leak because we're all surrounded by areas with no regulations till you get to Pickens County.
Yep. Mike, final comment.
One final comment. Maybe we have you guys talk to your counterparts up and ask, ordinance is in place. Every container needs to be bear-proof. They have a much bigger problem with bears than you guys have in Carbondale.
Yep.
So what do we do? Do we modify the ordinance that Aspen has? I think they had it pretty well dialed in, but they still have a problem than when we have in Carbondale.
Okay. Marty?
Very quick. Do we have any type of policy or enforcement? I mean, when I see people just with plastic garbage bags out there next to their containers, when I see it's overflowing, I mean, literally you can't shut the lid.
I have to look, but I don't think that violates our trash ordinance unless it's spread
or
But if you have a bear-proof container,
yeah,
and you can't shut the lid, or you can't, it's no longer bear-proof.
Right, no, I understand. I'm just saying for the present, till we get to that ordinance.
Right.
Okay, we have people who are just putting out black plastic garbage bags, you know.
If it is an ordinance, they'll still continue to put their trash bags and pile the trash up all the way around the trash can.
Right, but then if we have the ability to cite them, you know, then we can disincentive.
It's a different story.
Final.
Thing, Jay, in addition to Aspen, maybe we could talk to Boulder and Durango. I was just, during the discussion, I was looking up some news articles. Durango's dealing with this. Boulder's got ordinances
in all different communities. I've failed.
Learn from what they allow, what they require, and then that would help inform us, or inform me at least.
Okay, let's take a 4-minute break till 7:52.
4-minute break.
right, we'll bring the meeting back to order. For our final agenda item for the night, we have Trustee.
What?
He turned into a pumpkin.
It's our accountant.
We're
not that heavy into numbers yet.
Yeah, wait a month or two.
We're on item number 11, the 2018 budget review budget process, revised revenue projections, and year-to-date financials. Renee, thank you.
Well, this is very, very preliminary. You know, you'll receive the draft budget, the one we'll start working with the first meeting in October. Until then, we continue to work, redefine, look at the estimates, look at our options. So this is still a moving target. So a lot of the numbers in here, Jay and I had an opportunity yesterday afternoon to sit down. There were some grants that were misallocated that I had thought would be like next year. Jay said, no, those are this year. So we went back and started revising some of the grants sections. So those numbers continue to change. We have received, as we noted in the memo, we've received the mineral leasing and severance tax. So we now have what those amounts are going to be this year. We're starting to see for next year. You have those with the graph. We know the highway user tax numbers now. So we continue to play with this and work with it. We know property tax valuations went up 6%. And so that means our property tax will probably go up by 6.9%. Next year is the reassessment, so who knows what will happen after that. So we continue to play with this. Sales tax right now through August, we're up 3.4% for the year. We budgeted 2%, so that's still looking strong. That the mineral leasing was up 18.4% from 2016. Statewide, it's down 15.6%. The severance tax for us was down 7.7%. The state, it was down 20%. So they're working with those formulas, and you've all been given the background on those formulas and how they theoretically work. So one goes up, even though the state went down, the state went down. So, and the road and bridge, that's one that Jay probably has more insight into. If you remember last year, they cut it in half without letting us know, but it was in their budget, which we all read. And so this year, they backfilled and kept the amount the same. Assuming next year they will do that, we do not know that to be a fact yet. So that number could still change.
Jay, just on that, do you know when, or do you have a sense of when we'll know from the county whether or not they'll?
Probably within a couple weeks, we'll find out if it's in the draft budget. The county do the last 2 weeks, kind of their departmental review like we do. You know, early indications are that they were planning on including that backfilling at a similar level. It'll be based on what the assessed valuation, on actually what the property tax would have generated when they reset the road and bridge mill levy 2 years ago. So I think there's a good chance it's there, but we won't know for sure. I asked the county to let us know if, you know, they come to remove it, to please or significantly reduce it, to please let the municipalities know ahead of time so we could attend their budget hearings and discuss that. So we'll continue those discussions.
Okay. Renee, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, that's fine. So basically on the revenues, we're following your direction for next year with the 2% for sales tax and moving forward. Basically, you've got 18 funds that we deal with, and the revenues from all of those, we've always done the fund explanation. Many of you are new this year, so I thought just a real fast overview of our funds and where the revenues come from.
Can you tell us what page you're on when you're talking details like that or numbers? Like, are you on a page in here that you're about to?
Really?
Okay, that's fine. I'm just flipping, and I think a lot of us are looking for you. That's fine. I'll stop looking.
Oh, that's, and the numbers and stuff that you've seen in here are very preliminary. What you may want to do is to follow the funds, look at the projected ending fund balance for 2017.
Which would be page 122 of 148.
Thank you.
That's probably the most helpful one to look at.
Thanks.
Because fund, the estimated beginning fund balance is basically your audited fund balance from 2016. The revenue number has already changed by about 100,000. The expenditures have changed. So the revenues in the past, and you have a graph that shows those, and that's this one. And just taxes, 10% of the revenue, intergovernmentals, 11%, fines are 1%, other revenues are 4%, permits are 3%, charges and fees are 3%. Your operating transfers are 68% of your revenues. Those are from your sales tax and service fees to three other funds: water fund, wastewater fund, and the sales tax. So that's your general fund. Conservation Trust is your lotto disbursements from the state. Victims assistance is the surcharge on your traffic tickets. The lodging tax is from the 2% lodging tax that we charge. Disposable bag fee is the charge to the grocery store for the waste reduction. 1% for the arts. Most of that lately has been donations. Energy efficient building, that is from the building program.
That's from a surcharge under the Green Building Code if someone buys out of a solar panel array.
Stupid. Sorry.
The wastewater fund is basically tap fees and user fees. The water fund, same thing, water, tap fees, and user fees. The Carbondale Housing Fund, that's an RETA on certain projects, and our leases, and the general fund contributes to that one. The development dedication, that's from your park open space, and that's all the money that's left for park open space.
And just a real clarification on that. In the past, we've been helping balance our budget, our operating side, by transferring between $175,000 and $135,000 a year on an annual basis from that fund to the general fund. That was a surcharge primarily on square footage BR in Hendricks Ranch, with the idea that those projects weren't going to have much commercial or any commercial. And so the town, through the development agreement, said, hey, we're going to charge you extra because you're not going to be actually paying your full freight of municipal services based on a square footage cost. The kind of party's over on that. The back now is for park acquisition. Is the park, both improvements and acquisition fees are what's the balance of that account, because it was used for both. So that's an opportunity which no longer exists for us to help cover shortfalls in revenues for the general fund.
So what was the 30,000 in revenue in that one for this year?
It would have been square footage on RVR homes.
Oh, because they're still building out some.
Yeah, and Hendrick. We have one or two in Hendrick.
Gotcha.
But our obligation to the park is higher than what the current fund balance is.
Can you just explain that a tiny bit more? What's our obligation there? Like, what do you mean by that exactly? Like, what are we obligated to do as far as park dedication?
Well, what I'm trying to diplomatic is that we've spent down the account beyond what we should have for the general fund, and we have to build it up to the minimum amounts, which should be going into the parks long-term for park acquisition. So that would be like there's an opportunity to acquire park space on the town boundaries. That was an idea that certain projects, as you know, weren't providing enough park space within their boundaries, so they were paying the fees in lieu. Okay. And we banked those over the years.
That also went into this.
It went into the same account, yeah, or the same fund, excuse me.
What is the minimum that it's supposed to be held at?
We should have about 300.
450 approximately, and we dropped that a little bit farther than it should have been.
And does that mean we could never spend that 350 and draw it down, or is it just there in case there's no?
We would be spending that for the purposes of the park dedication fee. So, for example, if there's a project which you targeted as saying, hey, this is, parkland that we want to, you could use this funding for that.
Cool.
But we can no longer use it to supplement the general.
I can no longer use it to bounce the budget and like at the last minute say, hey, here's a little funding source that we can use to bounce the budget.
Which had been the case for a number of years.
More or less.
And rep days.
Okay.
Okay. Streetscape, that's the 1.5 mill levy that expires in 2020. Construction, that's basically funded from the general fund every year. Recreation, sales and use tax fund, that's the 0.5% sales tax. It grants, charges and fees. Community enhancement, the revenue comes from Holy Cross, and we went into the deficit on that one this year with Miners Park, so it'll be about 3 years before that one's back to even.
That's the undergrounding project. Yeah.
And sales and use tax, that's basically through fund. We collect our sales and motor vehicle and use tax and put it in there and then allocate it back to the general fund or the recreation fund. And the bond fund, that's just paid into, and then the bonds are paid out of that. The bond fund is a legal requirement for the rec bonds, and that's the balance that'll stay in there. So that kind of gives you an overall summary of where the revenues come from for your 18 different funds.
So Luis, I just want to be clear, because some towns have a dedicated revenue source for capital, but just Renee said, we don't have a revenue source for capital. We just steal from the general fund. So that $600,000 is whatever we want to steal from the general fund. It doesn't have a revenue source.
Don't use the term steal.
Transfer over.
And just to also clarify, the bond and interest, the only bonds that we actually have is on the rec center. Two on the rec center. So
And that's done in another
2024, I believe.
For both of them.
Yeah. So in that sense, debt on the general fund, or other than the Parks and Rec side, there's no debt on our utility side either, or the general fund. We're not paying off this building, which allows us to kind of manage our cash kind of carefully, because we obligations which we need to put money aside for 2, 3, 4 years out of payments.
Okay. And Renee, I wanted to clarify something else maybe for the listening public. You mentioned that the assessed value of the property went up about 6%. Right. But really, because property tax is such a small portion, it's about 4% of our overall revenue. It may go up 6%, but that's really only about 0.25% of our overall revenue. So we really don't get much from property tax. So I just wanted to explain that when property values go up, the towns don't necessarily prosper as a result. Marty?
Yeah, there are two things. We're exceeding sales tax for revenue. That's one thing. But the second thing is, like last year when we wanted to do any capital improvements we had to take that from reserves. And what I'm kind of getting is we're in this year for capital improvements. We'll have to get it from reserves. How are our reserves, first off?
The numbers that you're looking at here, as I said, they're a moving target.
Right.
And working with them today, it appears the estimate as of 5 minutes ago when I was on the computer, we should bring in revenues this year to cover our expenditures. So we're looking at hopefully a zero.
Okay, so our reserves, if I remember from last year, like 4.5 million, somewhere between 4.5 and 5 million.
We ended 2016 with a fund balance of 5.4 million.
Okay.
And the policy that we came up with last year was to keep it 5% in that fund balance.
Okay.
As a cushion, yes. So we've done okay this year. I think it'll be a break-even year for us. Some of that's a combination of, Dan likes to use the term conservative budgeting when he and I talk on Tuesday mornings. Part of it's a combination of that, and then some of the things that we had planned to get completed in 2017 may not all happen, or maybe broke years or something. So, those are some of the things that we that we look at.
One thing you and I had spoken about, that this building is going to need some improvements. How old is this building again?
It was built in 1997.
97, so it's 20 years old. Okay, I can relate to that. 18 years old. And like all 18-year-old or 20-year-old buildings, they need, sometimes you can just maintain it, sometimes you have to go out and replace stuff. So that's where I guess we're coming to with this, and we're going to hear more of that from Public Works or...
Well, it'll be as we kind of review the overall budget with you, but just on that topic, a couple of big ticket items. Right now, we're looking at replacing the fire alarm system in here, trying to do it out of this year's budget. We're doing a walkthrough with a company next week on it, but most of the conduit's good, the wiring should be good, but the box and the supporting infrastructure needs to be replaced. Next year, there will be $40,000 in the draft budget to redo the entire phone system for town. We own our own system in the early 90s and have gotten a very good lifespan out of it, but it's no longer supported by the manufacturer, so you can't get the software to support it. So it's time to move on and sell that as surplus. So that's about a $4 hit to do the whole system town-wide. So those are the type of things in this building which are coming due. Some of the heating and cooling units, we've done one replacement, but we'll have to look at those as they start going. 2 years ago was our first big hit on that side. So, yeah.
So a clarification on the way I should be reading this. I'm on page 123 of 148. I guess at first I was percent budget to date, but I don't think that's how you meant this. This is actually a percent of the entire year's budget. That's how I should be reading that, correct? So, in other words, for the end of 8 months, revenue is spot on, and spending is low for what we had budgeted. Is that correct?
Yes. Right, but we haven't spent a lot of those funds yet.
Some of it's money we've spent, but the bill hasn't come.
Okay. So I wanted to make sure I was reading it correctly, and then I kind of wanted to ask, like you're saying, we're probably going to hit spot on. This says we haven't spent some, and so that's not, you're not pulling back on anything that's been in the budget for this year. You're track with people spending what they need to. And
exactly, and I'm not a big believer like end of the year spending spree, but there's things that we look at and say, hey, we have an opportunity to accomplish it this year. Like we were just talking about the Conservation Trust Fund. We saw there was enough money in there to do a park retrofit with the Bear trash cans. Let's get it done this year. There's the opportunity to fit it within the budget, this year. So we when we do the department by department review, almost like line by line, we look at like we sit down with the department and say, why haven't we gotten this done this year? And, is this something that we should take advantage of and try to finish in the next, 3 or 4 months, or is it something in process?
Mm-hmm. How often do you do that where it reflects like the line by line in the budget?
We do that. They get their reports on a basis, but we do that review in late August and September where we go through, here's your date, what's the plan on the balance. I have a pretty good understanding of all the different capital projects and where they stand and where we stand. And I think where you'll see the biggest variations is in the utilities funds. Those are where we end up often budgeting projects which may end up in the next year. I mean, the hydro plant, for example, is part of that's been budgeted for 5 years.
Sure.
We budget line replacements for water lines in case we need a line, but it might be every other year we'll actually do a regular project. So in those cases, you see a little. It's not that the capital needs aren't there; it's how we prioritize them getting them done, or where the capacity is there.
And let's say one so we had 50,000 for the needs assessment for planning and zoning. Or are we just going to carry that into next year?
What we don't do is necessarily carry funds, but we re-budget. But in this case,
we could decide
we had transferred, what you did last year was transferred $50,000 in from the general fund into the housing fund for that. Okay. So that's actually sitting as a balance in the housing fund.
And that's reflected in this summary of the housing fund?
In the housing fund. Now, we're also looking at using part of the matching funds for the art space housing study too. In the draft budget for next year, as we're trying to get closer to a balanced budget, I think we tentatively have a $30,000 transfer going to that housing fund instead of 50, but carry forward that kind of program that the board indicated they were interested in, and we'll show you that as we get the budget. It's not that we didn't want to move 50 in; it's just trying to get the budget balanced for next year. The biggest challenge, and I think we talked about this, is you look at these revenue forecasts. When your sales tax is your major item and you're forecasting a 2%, our vast majority of costs, we've got 59 employees. We don't have much money for capital work. We're pretty much a service organization, which is based on employee costs. So when your health insurance goes up 13.5%, when you're trying to do some adjustments with salaries, maybe and you're not seeing a ton of employee turnover, bringing folks in at a lower part of the wage, the employee costs are rising at a much higher percentage than the revenue side. So if you actually graph the percentage of our employee costs this decade, each one of those pie charts gets bigger on the direct employee costs, and we become more of an employee-focused service organization as opposed to a lot of capital stuff happening out in the field. Now, that said, we're also using our staff to do some of that work, like lights just went out along the highway today, just started getting installed. It looks pretty nice out there. We get a lot done, but it's a little different model. We don't contract quite as much capital stuff out. So that, on the big picture, the other thing, if you look at the breakdown of where our sales tax revenue comes from, and I think if you look on, it's pretty interesting to look at how we break out by category in
115.
In Carbondale, because our biggest growth in sales tax revenue is liquor and marijuana.
All of our vices.
I mean, just to be honest, that's where we've
doubled in 5 years.
Yeah.
Kathy.
We have that separate excise tax and sales tax on marijuana outside of our standard sales tax items. And when you look at the revenues coming forward on that, that's basically offsetting what the square footage and the development fee we're not transferring over anymore. It's over $100,000 a year coming off that excise tax, where 3 years ago we weren't seeing that.
It wasn't existent before then.
Yeah. And then when you look at that, that doesn't include the actual sales tax, which is collected with the 3.5% or the state share back, which goes into our, the general sales tax.
Now, is that excise tax, is that the one that has to be dedicated like to education, marijuana education and stuff?
We dedicate 30,000.
So we dedicate 30,000. The way we passed that, or the election passed it, was for prevention, substance abuse, that type of programming, and the administration of the program too. So just to, when I was looking at where we're seeing growth, everything else kind of has been kind of a standard, what you'd expect to see with the changing retail market out there, and that's been our pretty good growth side. And it's not just on the marijuana side. I think the alcohol side, we've got a couple big retailers pretty well.
Renee, is there anything else you want to review with us?
Well, like I said, it's a moving target. We'll keep after it. We'll keep watching. As you guys review this, if you see, projections that you think are not quite right, ask about them. Dan already came up with a good idea and breaking down graphs further today, so we'll be working on that. So, like I said, it's a moving target. We'll keep working on it. The draft will be your first meeting in October when we do the draft, and then we open it up to comments from the public, and we can get it published at that time so everybody knows it's out there. And data, and hopefully by October we have a pretty firm handle on our revenues, expenses, and going forward.
Marty?
Just quickly, Kathy, don't we have a deadline coming up? Profits to put in their requests next year. Yeah, so that has to be in by this Friday. So if you know people with nonprofits, it's now or never.
Yeah, and we really have tried to broaden that base out where it used to just kind of be the same folks every year. We seem to get new applications each year. I think that's helpful.
And for Luis and Eric, I can't remember when you came on, but so we'll talk about things on a department level after this. So that's where you can ask the specific questions, or we'll have specific discussions about specific line items if we want.
Just as a summary for people when they ask us about it, what you've said, I just want to make sure I'm accurate, is that our sales tax is up a little over 3%.
3.4% year to date through August 31st.
Property tax is up about 9%, but
6.9.
So that's why your assessment will go up next year.
So next year
This year is basically what we budgeted.
This year's flat, okay. But
next year we will project an increase of 6.9 based on valuations going up.
Okay. But it's hard for people to understand. I think what Jay said really helps, that even though our revenues are up in these categories, increased employee costs, mostly health insurance, those increases in revenues, we're basically looking at flat spending.
Flat, or in some cases reduced, to try to keep the current service levels in place. That's kind of the challenge in the trend. We were, in past years, we had some, if you look like the graphs on the federal mineral lease and severance tax, we had a couple years which, suddenly there was 600, which showed up that we were in much better shape financially, which kind of helped build our fund balance over time. But yeah, our costs over the last 6-8 years, the employee side continues to go. And the revenue isn't keeping up with that. So we can balance it by reducing capital or other needs in the community to try to keep the same service levels in place.
The number of FTEs or employees isn't increasing. It's not like we're just adding employees and therefore our costs are going up. The costs for
We did not backfill, when we did the reductions in 2008, the majority of reasons when we downsized were not backfilled.
Right. I just want to clarify that.
And just also, for some of our new members, when we spoke last year about budget, we took part of our reserves and specific projects, but we were concerned that we didn't want a situation like 2008 again, where we potentially lost employees, where we lost staff, where we had to say that no, we can't afford this many people in planning or whatever. So I mean, I thought we did a pretty good job of taking some from the reserves, but being conservative and keeping a good balance there. And we could do something similar this year. I mean, it's hard to, can't give everyone everything, but you try to take care of the essentials and leave ourselves in a good enough financial position. So if an opportunity comes along, whatever, that the money's there to take advantage of it, but still have reserves for that rainy day.
The difference is, I think our reserves were even higher as a percentage of our budget.
Oh, yeah.
The year prior. So our ability to do the same thing we did last year.
To the same degree.
Right. So if we were to take 500,000 from the general fund and put it in the capital fund, our reserves will likely be less than that 75% target, correct?
We'll see.
Okay.
We'll be close to that. Our goal would be to keep that.
Okay.
And once again, we're some of the capital stuff and try to figure out how we continue to stretch those dollars. Dan and I talked. We'll go into more details, but on some of our maintenance programs, we might be changing the specs up a little bit where we can stretch the dollars a little further and do things a little bit differently with another look at things on the public works side. And there's some things we're going to continue to look. I'm also a big believer in keeping our fleet as current as possible, because you let that get, away from you, it takes years and years to catch up. One of the things we did in 2008, 2009 was we just stopped all spending, put the money in the bank, but then we ended up buying some pretty after that because we weren't keeping up on some of the replacement of things. So
I think the message, and I know I sound like a broken record, is, and Ben, I'm glad you were clarifying this, the issues of increasing costs, even in a good economy where our sales tax is going up, is issue. This problem is going to continue to get worse. If you can kind of surmise what we're getting from the grocery stores, and even if we were to have a new city market next year and sales were to increase a little bit, we're not really out of that hump, because that's been some of the comment is just wait to see if, when city market comes, and we'll be good to go. But there's a systemic issue here where our costs are outpacing our revenue. And that's why I keep hammering, at least extending the streetscape and possibly looking for other funds, because this problem just keeps getting worse. So.
And I'm very much interested in seeing that, in this budget with a concrete approach to what that means, what the implications are, how we look at options for additional revenue sources. If you put a shovel in the ground right now, you wouldn't see city market changes in 2018. And we know there's not a shovel going in the ground right now. So, and really at the end of the day, I think that, I too believe that kind of regardless of that, and even if there were the increases to go along with the new city market, it does not change the reliance on sales tax. And it does not change a lack of resilience against things like, large inspections. So, I'm very, very interested in taking some really hard looks at what the options are and what's on the table, and on both sides, right? What the capital improvement plans really need to be, and over what number of years and things like that. And I think Kevin, playing a huge role in that, obviously, because anything that we do move forward that is going to go to the public watching and the taxpayers, we have to be armed truly with the information of what those needs are. And I think we've faltered in the past.
Two quick comments. The employee health insurance costs, that's something everyone's experiencing. I mean, even if, you have a small business, Heather, so you are paying your own, so I know you feel the pain. Dan, you work for a larger company. I'm sure you of the insurance costs, so I know you're feeling the pain. So this is something that's systemic to everyone, given our present health insurance system, and since Congress doesn't seem to be able to figure out a solution, that isn't going to go away. The second thing is, I agree with you, the new system is not going to be the be-all and end-all. It may help, but on the good side, we're getting that much closer to the rec center and the bonds being paid off, which, what's going to be done with that money once that's paid off? It's a question I'm sure Parks and Rec are thinking about, and we should be thinking about. But, so I don't want to paint it so bleak. I want to give credit to staff for helping us to keep our head above water. It seems to me we just, like any family, we have to prioritize where we're going to be able to spend our money and have money in reserves, because something always comes up that isn't expected.
Jay and Renee, this is a little bit off on a tangent, but it's reminding me. So I've been thinking that, and I've been rightly or wrongly, that Carbondale is a little bit more self-sustaining than our neighbors when it comes to sales tax, in that it's our community that is paying for these sales tax in general. Obviously, we've got shoppers from Redstone and Marble, but I would be curious to know, and there's no hurry on this, but what did our sales tax do during the recession compared to Aspen, where they're more dependent on importing shoppers than we are? And to me, that would indicate that we are a little bit more self-sufficient. It's kind of anecdotal. It's not really going to lead to any major conclusion, but if that's an easy number to these statistics to look at, I think it helps frame the story a little bit.
And I think in general, a lot of times what we see is we'll lag maybe 6 months or a year behind the reductions from some of the other communities, that usually just there's a lag time and we might spring back a little bit slower because folks' income drops off. They're still shopping, local, but then they save up a little bit on the other side. So I think we'll in general, Renee's been doing budgets between here and Basalt for a long time, but I think that's a trend. The other thing, and not to be all doom and gloom, we've got healthy reserves. I think the town's managed its money pretty carefully over the past decade, 20 years. There's neighboring communities which struggling to get up to a 33% reserve level. Right. We're going to keep it 75 or above because we need to have a better cushion, and I just think it's prudent cash management for the town. So I always tell folks we have some real financial challenges, but we're not broke, and that's, I think, an important message to folks. We get people rolling in and say, "Hey, this town's got a lot of money. I pay a lot of property tax. Why don't I have that full service recycling center?" Those are the comments we have. People actually stop in our shop and ask folks in the shop and explain, well, actually, financially to provide that service, and we're not sitting on those extra funds to operate something like that. And I think a lot of it's what we manage the expectations. When I sit down with some of the groups in Carbondale which provide other services in the town, the nonprofits, the arts community, some of the other folks, the question is, why can't we get the type of support from the town that we get from what other groups get throughout the valley? And we're a different financial model. Yep. We're not Aspen. We're not a $100 million budget. We're a fraction of that, and that's something where it just have to manage that expectation and to that service level.
Other questions, comments? Heather and Luis?
So two more. One, I again really appreciate not only the information that you guys choose to provide, but how you provide it. It's very helpful and understandable. So kudos on the work that you guys have done so far, and I know the budget will be right there. And Jay, to your point, I mean, kudos on that as well, whether it's called conservative or sort of prudent management. I think that's exactly right. We're on very, it's not doom and gloom, stable ground financially between the reserves, lack of debt, and at a minimum working through a very balanced budget. There was one that jumped out as the recreation sales and use tax. When I got on that board, we were dipping into the $500,000 each year. And so it's one of those things that, as you came on and in that time, you guys worked to get that kind of thing really under control and to a very sort of prudent approach to what was coming in and what had to go out the door. So I appreciate it, and that it's not doom and gloom. And actually, with this stable foundation, I think it provides us the opportunity to take the time to look very carefully at where we go from here. Thinking 6 years in advance when the bond is paid off. Of the capital improvement plan in 5 and 10 years and what we really want to do. And so I really appreciate that, because sitting here and, having come the last 10 years out of such a massive recession, we could be in a very, very different position. So I really appreciate that.
Luis?
Yes, just thanks for all the work that's gone into this, to Renee, Jay, and everyone else that's worked on this. It's and to me, it's just kind of more of an observation or comment that it's great to see there's such an investment now of new businesses hopefully coming into Main Street, like Kenichi and other things that have just opened up recently, like the handmaker space, that help increase the bottom line. So despite what may the city market, there is a continued vitality out there that makes people want to come to Carbondale and spend money here. So
right on.
I have just a detailed question, and it's along the lines, because I've always heard about this rec sales and use tax. People talk about whether, our rec department is sort of self-sufficient from that or not, and all that. And so on the page 122 of 148, the overall table with all the funds, the numbers there are different than the numbers a couple pages later. So I just want to understand.
I'm not sure what pages you're looking at, Ben. Same page.
So the fund summary is 122 on the ending fund balance. And then which was the other one you're?
Well, so on this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
The one that is a moving target right now.
Okay.
So this one printed off is not going to balance to your financial statements, because those were static as of 8/31. This one was as of when I printed it to go into the packet on Thursday morning.
But one of the things I think that what you're getting at, Ben, is Parks and Rec is broken into two different spots. So there's the Parks and Rec portion of the general fund, which is how we funded all these before the rec center was, and the swimming pool. Well, before we did the rec use and sales tax, everything was out of the general fund. So part of Parks and Recreation is all of parks, and some of recreation is still funded out of the general fund. And then you have the Parks the rec use and sales tax, which is the rec center and specific recreation programming. So there's actually two different. When we look at the in detail on the Parks and Rec department, we'll break it out and show that to you on what's coming out of the general fund and what's coming out of the parks or the rec use and sales tax. I think what Heather was getting at, what we would fondly refer to as the burn rate on that fund, at one point was $300,000 to $500,000. our goal was to get that down to $60,000 or $80,000, so that it could take us out through 2024 once the bonds are paid off, and that we weren't going to, that we were keeping enough money in that account to support what we needed to pay off the bonds and still operate the rec center. And the reason why we were spending so much money out of that fund is that's where we were getting money to match grant funds to do projects. And we kind of rebased and said, we're not going to build courts were done and a couple other projects, that we weren't going to build a lot of new rec facilities. We were going to try to concentrate on maintaining the ones that we had. But so it went from kind of this big number down to a smaller number. Some of that was a little more strained on the general fund too, because when that fund first came together, the rec use and sales tax fund, it's like, oh, let's charge everything to that, and we re-looked at where things should be charged to. So that. There's two different spots, but I mean, our big operating departments for the town, if you don't take the utilities, are PD, Public Works, and Parks and Rec. Those are kind of our big three in terms of costs for service provisions in the town, and the PD is normally going to win that every year. Thank you. Public safety will be our
highest. And you've made
one.
like some changes internally around of parks, correct? Where much of it kind of under the purview of Larry.
So Parks last year, or early this year, I guess it was the end of last year, in January 1st, from a budget perspective, Parks was moved out of Public Works and into a new Parks and Rec. So all the maintenance crews doing and kind of cemetery maintenance is now part of a standalone Parks and Rec department. And Public Works now includes, from an administrative standpoint, street, arborist, and all the utilities now all report to Kevin. So we restructured that into more of a traditional setup. And I think it's a little, the public would never know the difference and should know the difference, but I think for us administratively, it makes a little operation and a little more ownership, because one of our big challenges we're having is that it's really great to build stuff. So we were building all kinds of park stuff, but then Public Works would have to go take care of it. So the rec department was writing the grants, and then the parks and public took care of it. And I think the poster child for challenging projects was the RV park, which was a great project to acquire that property, the boat ramp, the arrangement with the DOW. But we had no plan on how to operate an RV park. Plus, there was no plan on how to upgrade the utilities associated with that park. And we're still dealing with that, but now we're getting closer. In the draft budget now, the RV park will break, will break even or actually make a little bit of money versus where we were in the past of huge capital expenditures every year. But that was the model which kind of got us in trouble. And taking care of things.
Well, and I appreciate being able to see that in the budget as we move forward with the aging park and aging equipment. I think it was really, challenging to put that on the department not necessarily equipped to look at that kind of equipment, and so I think that's going to provide some to clarify those budgets and capital replacement for Parks and Rec very specifically. Very separate from infrastructure.
Yeah, and we've made some headway. I mean, the rodeo grounds, for example, is, through partnerships with the county and also with the rodeo committee, that facility is, other than the need for a land acquisition for more parking, but that facility is in, a much different place than it was 4 or 5 years ago. We carry that over to some of our other spots now.
Anything else? Clear as mud. Sounds like the RV park's a new cash cow. A couple $100,000 a year every year in the general fund.
we may pay $3 or $4 grand.
Hey, as long as we're not losing money, that's good.
Wishful thinking. Okay, Jay, anything on the minutes?
No, just the reason why those go back so far is many of those commissions didn't have quorums or didn't meet over the summer to approve minutes, so that's why there's a kind of a backlog on some of those.
We're like, wait, what? Oh, that's from April. Okay. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Ben, Jay, and